Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are so excited to have you here. And first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who's here. We know how busy everyone is. We know that you all have so many things going on in your lives, and yet you've been kind enough to take a few moments out of your busy days to be here with us. So I'm really grateful. We're so excited. This is the first video for Verbatim. This is our launch. And as you can imagine, I'm very nervous because it's the first video, it's live. We've had some technical difficulties just in the lead up. So, we want to do this phenomenal show for you guys where we explain everything and it's really interesting and fun and high paced and engaging. And I'm sure, we're not going to do as great a job as we'd like because, again, it's our first time and we're new to this. But if you'll be patient with us, I promise you that with each video, we're going to do our best to get better and better and better and to bring you more and more information each time about the industry that we love and are also very frustrated with. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the lovely ladies who are here with us today, Ina and Excel. And I'm going to give them a moment to introduce themselves. Ina, you can
Thank
go first.
you. Thank you, Paula. Hello, everyone. My name is Ina. First of all, thank you for joining. As Paula said, I know for some of you it may be late, some of you it may be very early, so we really appreciate you being here today. My name is Ina Dubin. Many of you may know me from a former company called Voice. I've been with that company for 6 years and no longer with that company, but I started in interpreting by pure accident. I took my dad to the doctor and they wouldn't let me interpret for him. They dialed interpreter and I looked at it and it looked fun. I thought I can do it and I needed a job. So it was really an accident, but I really loved the profession as I did more dived into it. I really loved grow to love it. But I've been in interpreting for as an interpreter for about 2 years, and then I moved into more administrative role. Many of you may know me from education and training department. Thanks to Paula, I started working as a trainer first, and then moved to the training lead, and eventually training manager. So I kind of know this profession from both sides, from the interpreter side and from administration side. Okay, I think that's it for me, Excel.
Yes, hi, thank you, Ina. Thank you, Paula. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for our launch today. So, if everybody who's joined in, like, we don't know where in the world you are, so we appreciate your presence. My name is Axel. I have been in the language service industry for, I want to say, 16 years now. I graduated with a degree in linguistics and a minor in French, and when I was in college, I started my career as an interpreter as well, simultaneously. I interpreted for about 5 to 6 years. And then, just like Ina, I've held administrative roles for certain vendors and LSPs along the way up until this year, up until last year, 2024. I've worked in the hospital settings, in the language departments, and like I mentioned, I work for vendors and LSPs as well. I'm excited to bring my experience and my knowledge to this new initiative. I'm excited to provide support, and again, thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much, Ina and Excel. And I'm just going to apologize to you guys. I have a bit of a cough. So I'll be drinking water and coughing and just being awful every once in a while. So I apologize for
That's
that.
fine,
Uh,
Paula. I think there's something going on. I think everybody's catching
Mhm.
whatever it is that's floating in the air these days.
Yeah, it's really bad. It's really bad. But yeah, thank you so much. These ladies are phenomenal. They know the industry inside and out, and I know they're going to bring so much to the discussion today. For those of you who may not know me, again, my name is Paula, and I have also worked in this industry, well, for decades now. Um, And, I think like most interpreters, I basically started interpreting as a child for my parents who were immigrants to the US when I was 3 years old. And so I kind of grew up doing it and then fell back into it. around 15 when I started doing simultaneous interpretations at our church, and then just moved on to legal, and then general interpretation, and then medical with OPI, VRI. Um, and I have also worked for the almost 10 years now, more on the administrative side of things, um, both outside of the industry and inside the industry more recently. So being in the administrative roles, especially having gone through quality assurance, compliance, and education and training, it's really given me a holistic view of the industry. And some of you may know me, just like um, Ina here, from the many courses that we designed and created and trainings that we administered, and from a very successful and highly regarded 60-hour course that we're super proud of that we were a part of. So again, thank you for being here. So we're going to get started. We're going to try to dive in. We have a lot to cover today. And because there's so much to cover, we're going to kind of run through some things. We're going to have a little bit of a structure that we're going to explain right now, just so that you guys know how this is going to go. And like I said, we're going to do our best to make it great, but bear with us. So, Ina, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you. So, guys, today we are going to give you a lot of critical information, and to keep it more concise and clear for you, easier to understand, we're going to break it out into three different parts. The first part is going to be looking into LSPs and vendors and how they operated in the past. And then we are also going to look at the financials of the vendors, because we need to understand how much LSPs get paid and where they get their funds from. And once we understand this, this is a vital information for interpreters to know, to see the other side of the operation of the industry.
Yeah. Then in part two, we're going to take a deep dive into the market forces that are currently shaking up the industry. This includes economic shifts, the threat of AI, as well as the most dreaded one of all that's really been responsible for most of the mess that we're seeing right now, the brand new labor law. So these forces are really pressuring the LSPs in ways that we haven't seen before, and it's leading to a lot of drastic changes, and they are affecting everyone.
And then in part three, we will connect all the dots that we covered, and we will break down for you how and why this all creating a chaos in the industry, especially low pay and fewer job opportunities, and let's face it, uncertain future for many of us as interpreters.
I just
Yeah.
want to say
So
I see some comments coming in, so thank you guys for that. We will make sure to read each and every one of them, and we will answer as we go. If you guys have any questions, we'll try to cover everything that you might be wondering about. I'll be keeping an eye on the comments here and the questions while Paula and Ina give you more of a broad overview of what it is that we're discussing tonight.
thank you so much for that, Excel. And yes,
Mhm.
please keep them coming. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So we're taking this step-by-step approach for a reason. We have found that many interpreters, even those who've been in the industry for decades, really have no idea how the industry actually works. And I know that was true for me until I came into the administrative roles, and it's been true for almost every interpreter I've talked to in the past. And so we're going to lay this foundation today. We're going to give you a lot of information. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to go in chunks. So we're going to cover, like we said, certain topics at a time. And we'll go over a few things that are happening, and then we'll take a little break. And the three of us will discuss what we just explained to you. And then if you have questions, we can also take those questions at that time. And then we'll go back and we'll discuss a little bit more facts, just giving you a lay of the land, and then we'll discuss it as a panel discussion again, take some more questions, and we'll just kind of go back and forth like that. Again, this is brand new to us, this is the first time we're doing it. We'd also love it if once we get to the end of it, if you guys feel like this is a great model, let us know. We'll continue to do it. And if you guys say, yeah, it was too much or we really didn't like it, let us know. Give us feedback because that'll help us to improve, because we really want you guys coming back every week because we really have a lot to share with you. And it's just really important to us to be able to support all of you. So we're going to be laying this foundation today, and then next week we're going to start talking about some of the exciting solutions that we believe we need to implement in this market to safeguard interpreters and patients, and really those who are most vulnerable, who are the ones who are paying the biggest cost for the decisions that are being made right now. So, without further ado, let's get started. Um, Now, full disclosure, we were supposed to. I'm gonna be really transparent with you guys here. We had a video planned for you guys for this portion, but we're having some technical difficulties, so it's looking like that video portion isn't going to work out. So I'll go ahead and present it, and then we'll come back and do the discussion. So just really quickly, just to give you guys the basics, right? What is an LSP? What is a vendor? What the heck is a BPO? Just very basic fundamental questions. Most of you probably know the answers to all of these. But in simple terms, an LSP or a language service provider is a company that contracts directly with clients. So if it's an LSP in the medical interpretation industry, it would contract with hospitals and clinics and other healthcare institutions. Some only cater to legal, so that's who they would contract with, and then others contract with a whole array of companies from every industry out there. And so the LSP, just keep that in mind, always contracts directly with the client. Another distinguishing point that you need to remember about an LSP is that it has an interpretation platform. Now, that platform is made up of hardware and software, and it's where those calls come through for VRI and OPI calls, and where you, as the interpreter, log in and are able to service the clients. So, those are two key things you need to know about those two models, LSP and then vendor or BPO, which really a vendor and a BPO are essentially the same exact thing. And you'll see me use the terms interchangeably. Um, now that we've laid that down, what is a vendor or BPO and how is it different from an LSP? The vendor or BPO does not contract directly with the clients. The vendor contracts directly with the LSP. So that's the first distinguishing factor between the two of them. And then the second one is that the vendor does not have an interpretation platform. So what that means is that when you work for a vendor, that vendor is contracted to the LSP. That vendor will then supply you, the interpreter, to the LSP, even though you work for them. So what it means is you're not going to be logging into the vendor's platform because they don't have one. Instead, you're going to be logging into the LSP's platform and you're going to be handling calls for that LSP, but you're going to be doing it under the vendor company. And so you're being paid directly by the vendor company, not by the LSP. So, ladies, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, if there's anything that I left out. Um,
Paula, just on a side note, I think Excel got kicked out. She's backstage. If
oh,
you can accept her, thank you.
yes.
Uh,
Live TV, ladies and gentlemen.
yes.
There we go.
Hi,
She's back.
Welcome back.
I'm back. I was
Uh,
backstage. I'm not sure what happened. I'm sorry about that, but I was able to hear
it's okay.
what you said, Paula. Very good
This
description.
is
I want to
proof that we're live.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm still here. Thank you for the explanation that you gave about, the differences between LSPs and vendors.
Hmm.
I'll continue to check the comments to see if anybody has any questions about that.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. So now that you have the basics and you know how this whole thing works in terms of, who's taking the calls for who, let's take a step further. let's look at how the BPOs and the vendors interact with each other, right? Like we said, the BPOs handle the calls for the BPOs handle the calls for the LSPs. The LSPs are contracted directly to the clients. So this creates a little bit of conflict. And here's why. Historically, BPOs have not invested in things such as quality assurance, education and training, or even top tier recruitment and candidate assessments. So, what this means is that historically, BPOs, their quality wasn't as high as an LSP would like it to be. And so something that you would often see would be more experienced interpreters would usually be working for an LSP, whereas those who were starting in the industry who maybe didn't have as much experience and really couldn't pass the strict candidate assessments that a lot of LSPs out there have, they would end up working for the BPO because the BPOs had less strict guidelines for you to work for them. They weren't doing quality assurance checks, they weren't doing compliance checks, they weren't doing education and training, and they weren't paying you very well at all. So that's where you would kind of fit in. Um, and because of this, at least in my experience with any LSP I've worked with, LSPs were very, very hesitant to work with BPOs or vendors. And so what they would do is they would hire their workforce, they would hire all of their interpreters either as independent contractors, freelancers, or even as direct employees, and they would provide their workforce with education and training, quality assurance, all of the development that they needed to become the best interpreters possible. And those interpreters would take the bulk of the LSP's calls. So when that hospital was calling, that call was being routed to the LSP's interpreter. So where did the vendors come in? The vendors would come in when there were too many calls, right? So they were the safety net, they were the backup. And the LSPs knew that the calls wouldn't be so great. They might be getting some complaints about some of those calls from vendors every once in a while. But overall, it helped them to be able to stay on top of coverage. And because it wasn't taking over the majority of their calls, it didn't cause too many problems with quality. Because you need to remember that, especially in medical interpretation, the hospitals expect interpreters to be just top tier. And I think Excel, you could speak a little bit to this because you've dealt a lot directly with the hospitals and you know what they expect from the interpreter workforce. So do you want to speak to that a little bit?
We can hear you.
You're
Yes, I'm
muted.
sorry
Okay.
about
Yep.
that. The technical
Yep.
difficulties keep finding me tonight.
Listen, it's our first
I
time.
want
It is
to
what it
take
is.
a small step back
Mhm.
and give a little bit of insight from a hospital or healthcare system or client perspective when it comes to BPOs or vendors. By the way, somebody asked in the comment, what does BPO stand for? It stands for business process outsourcing, as far as I know. So it's essentially the same thing as a vendor. And like Paula mentioned, there are slight discrepancies between vendors and LSPs where vendors don't necessarily provide training or quality assurance, etc. Right? They just provide people. In layman's terms, they just provide people who are bilingual, and and that's that. Now, from a client standpoint, when a client hires or acquires an LSP or a language service provider, a language access service, they don't necessarily know the differences or the nuances between BPOs or vendors and LSPs. They rely on that service that they're contracted with to provide the training. Well, first of all, they rely on that service to be certified. They want these interpreters to be medically trained, medically certified, HIPAA certified, so that they don't run into any quality issues during calls, during the servicing of calls with their patients, right? So they really typically rely on that service that they contracted with to do everything, to do the quality assurance, to do the training, to keep the certifications updated, etc. So now, with everything that's going on, where vendors are not providing this and LSPs have stopped providing that, that can create a big risk for the healthcare systems. It
Yeah.
becomes a challenge, it becomes a problem. They probably now, there are certain things that are in place now that they might not even be aware of. Eventually, they will very soon, because everything's going to start coming up to the surface, right? And so, Paula, as you go, I'll continue to provide a little bit more insight on how the healthcare systems are going to react to all of these changes and how these changes might affect interpreters on an individual basis, etc.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that you can be sure that hospitals and healthcare providers, they're not really aware of what's going on right now. And they're not going to be aware until the problems start popping up. So, yeah, no, those were some really great points. Um, so I think, unless there are any questions right now, I think those are just really simple basics. And if anybody has any questions, you can throw them our way. But that lays the groundwork, right? Now we're going to get a little nosy and we're going to check out, how much do LSPs get paid per minute? I mean, as interpreters, you know how much you get paid. How much do they get paid? And obviously, we can't speak for every company out there. There will be some differences. And the main differences that you'll find are between the very large interpreting companies who've been around for decades, right? Those companies that have been around since the 80s, 90s, they're huge. They dominate the market. For those companies, they do make slightly higher rates, but I would say that, and Excel, you can talk to this as well. But I would say that most, in my experience, most LSPs, especially the smaller ones and the newer ones, they're contracting at around 60 to 80 cents per minute, and that's for everything. Very few of those smaller, newer LSPs are making more than $1 per minute. And the reason is really simple, right? They're coming into the market and they're trying to take market share away from the really big established companies who've been around for decades. And one of the ways that they're able to do that is by giving them really low prices. And so it's not unheard of to see these newer LSPs being in the market selling their services for under $1. And a lot of times, and I've spoken to quite a few people over the last few weeks, and as I've done research, and they have confirmed to me that that 60 to 80 cents per minute is pretty standard across the industry right now. And that's an average. You'd be surprised, but there are hospitals out there who are paying 40 to 60 cents per minute. I don't know if any of the ladies want to say anything about that.
It's crazy to me, having been on both sides. So having been, on the interpreter side and having been on the admin side where I'm implementing language services for hospital clients, I've been able to see all the differences and how nothing is streamlined anymore. All these LSPs have rates that are all over the place. Negotiations are often all over the place, depending on where the interpreters are located. Sometimes they really lowball the interpreters. Sometimes even myself as an interpreter, I've contracted with LSPs before, and the rate that I was being paid was just so unfair, I would say. I mean, people think that being an interpreter is just speaking two languages fluently.
Mhm.
It's really not that. It's really not that. There's so much more to it, and it's a career for some people, right? And it's very important in the industry to have things a little bit more fair and a little bit more streamlined. And I think that that's the goal here. That's the intention.
Right.
That's our intention anyway, right? To bring everything to the
Mhm.
surface, to kind of streamline everything. I know that there are a lot of interpreters recently from different LSPs, and I don't need to name names, but I see feed and I connect with people. I network on LinkedIn and other platforms, and I know there's a lot of frustration there. And then in terms of what hospitals and healthcare systems or even other organizations are paying to these LSPs when they're contracting, sometimes the rates are very low. Sometimes the rate, like you mentioned, something like 60 cents a minute. So sometimes there's very little profit margins. And then sometimes that brings on repercussions to the interpreter's pay, because then, you know, the interpreters are not being paid fairly, because ultimately most healthcare organizations, most organizations, period, they're out there for profit. And so
Right.
at the end of the day, it's the interpreters that are suffering the most, because they're being underpaid. They're not getting the benefits that they should be getting. Um, and now some LSPs even make interpreters pay for their own training and to keep their own things up to date. And that's just crazy. It's
It's,
insane.
yeah.
The hospitals and the clients are not going to be responsible for paying these certifications and the trainings and so on. And so and so that's what I have to say about this. It needs to be streamlined a little bit more. I don't feel that there are many organizations out there that are trying to streamline everything. And I appreciate this initiative. I really do want to provide my support as best I can. Again, guys, if you have any questions about anything that we just mentioned, let us know in the comments and we'll try to answer as we go.
Yes. Yeah. And so to your point, the truth is that there is a big expectation on the side of the hospitals, right? They do expect interpreters to be certified, to be
Right.
highly trained. I mean, think about it. As a nurse or doctor, you usually only know what you need to know for
Right.
your specialty. That's it. That's
Correct.
all you need to know.
Mhm.
But if you're an interpreter, you need to know about
Everything.
every specialty, everything.
Exactly.
Everything.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And it's not uncommon for these hospitals. We've been in meetings with hospitals before where they want to see, like, well, what kind of specialty training are you doing? Do you have
Right.
specialty training for mental health, for women's health, for all of these, OBGYN, for all of these different fields in medicine that their own nurses and doctors are often just focused on one specialty. Interpreters need to
Right.
understand all of the specialties. And so they do expect a lot. And so
Yeah.
historically, LSPs have been really good, most of them, not all of them, but most of them have been really good at providing their interpreters with those trainings, right? Things such as HIPAA,
Mhm.
note taking skills, medical specialties, and so much more. But what we're starting to see now is a shift away from that. And we're going to get to that. But before we do, um, I want to kind of stay on this topic of how much the LSP industry gets paid and what that means in terms of what they do with that money. So when we say that an LSP on average is making 60 to 80 cents per minute, that's not profit. That's 60 to 80 cents per minute to operate. And so what that means is that from those 60 to 80 cents per minute, they have to pay their interpreters. They have to spend money on everything that's needed to run an interpreting company. And we're going to look at what those things are. So with that in mind, let's say that we have a company. Let's say we have a fictitious company, and let's say that it's called Ring. And let's say that Ring, it's doing pretty well for itself. All of its clients are paying it an average of $1 per minute, which is really nice, right? It's making $1 per minute. And let's say that Ring is paying its interpreters an average of 35 cents per minute. And this is an average. And the reason I'm saying that this is an average is because, as I'm sure you know, as interpreters, not all language pairs are paid the same amount, right? And so let's kind of take a look at that really quickly. If you are a let's say you speak a really rare language, I don't know, let's say you speak Yoruba, right? Um, you're not going to make 10, 15, 20 cents a minute. You're probably going to be making 50, 60 cents a minute or more. Why is that? How does an LSP decide that for certain languages it will pay more and for other languages it will pay less? Before I worked the administrative side, I thought that hospitals paid the companies different rates for different interpreters. And it wasn't until I started working in the industry that I realized that that's not what happens. Hospitals pay a flat rate, and correct me if I'm wrong, ladies. And then out of that flat rate, the LSPs pay you, the interpreters. So when you have the rare languages or languages that have low diffusion, what happens is you don't have that many interpreters to service that language. It's hard to find an interpreter who can interpret both Yoruba and English, for example. So you have a really hard time finding them. And when you do find them, you really want to keep them. And then on top of that, you also understand that those interpreters, they're not going to get calls throughout the day, every day. Their calls come in few and far between. And because of this, and because you don't want to lose them, you end up having to pay them a lot more per minute. So those interpreters of rare languages, languages of low diffusion, they have a lot of bargaining power. And if they don't like the rate you're offering them, they say, no, I'm not going to interpret for you. And they know you'll come up to their rate because you need them, right? But remember, the hospital isn't going to pay the LSP more for those languages. It's just paying whatever was agreed upon, that flat rate.
Right.
On the other hand, you have the languages with really high demand. So let's say Spanish, right? That's the number one language across the board. If you are a Spanish interpreter, you're in the complete opposite position of that Yoruba interpreter. And the reason is that even though there's really, really high demand for your language, there's also a ton of Spanish interpreters out there. And there are several countries where you can get Spanish interpreters from. So if Spanish interpreters are too expensive in Spain, you can go to Peru or you can go to Costa Rica. And so if this interpreter who speaks Spanish doesn't accept your rate, you just go to the next one and they'll accept your rate. And so Spanish interpreters don't have that much leveraging power. It does get made up a little bit in volume because Spanish interpreters do get a lot of call volume. So you're able to sustain that career, but it's never going to be the same. And so this is just to give you an overview of how companies come to these rates. And here's the thing, because some of these languages are so expensive, then they need to start undercutting other languages that they do have a lot of interpreters for to be able to cover the cost of the really expensive language. So it's kind of a catch-22. So even if they want to pay a Spanish interpreter more, if they have a lot of calls for, low diffusion languages, it becomes really difficult to do that. And this is where you also see a practice that is paying different rates for interpreters who speak the exact same language based on where they live, based on their cost of living. It is not uncommon for LSPs to look at a country and say, okay, what would be a good, decent salary in this country for an interpreter? And I've been really, really I don't know about you, Excel, but the companies I've been in, I know that they have cared about the interpreters and have actually tried to say, okay, this is a good living wage in this country. It's not like you're going to get rich off of it, but the companies I've been fortunate enough to be with have tried to pay fair salaries, but there are some companies out there that really don't care and really, really do undercut those interpreters.
Exactly. I agree. I agree.
Yeah. I agree too. Yeah.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I want to share a little graph with you, right? So we're still on our fictional company, Ring. And Ring, once it has added up all of its interpreters, right? So we said it's spending 35 cents per minute on interpreters and that this is an average. So what this means is that when Ring adds up all of the languages it services and divides them up, right? Let's say it has 100 different languages. It adds what it's paying to each of those languages, divides it by 100. The average that they're paying is now 35 cents a minute. What do they do with the remainder of their dollar, right? We said our company is making $1 a minute. So let me share this little chart with you guys. Now, the values for the different departments, those values are not accurate. Okay. I'm not saying that 15% is spent on platform or 5% is spent on equipment. That's just to give you an idea to do the 100. But we do have the interpreter here at 35%, so 35 cents. And most of these come pretty close. They're not 100% accurate, but they come close. So let's take a look at what LSPs have to spend money on. Um, you were telling me something about this the other
Mhm.
day about like how surprising some things were for you once you got into the administrative side. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you, Paula, and thank you for explaining all of this. I mean, um, I was really shocked when I switched from interpreter to administrative side because I found out how the other side works, right? When I started working as an interpreter and I got offered a certain rate, of course I thought it was unfair for all the work that I do in important work and like Excel said or Paula said that, I'm nowhere near, I didn't know anything about medical field or customer service field or anything, and then I had to do um, an important work, and I just felt that my compensation was not fair. And I thought that the company that hired me was a big bad wolf that was trying to kind of you know take my money. But when I start working on the administrative side, I kind of saw the other side of it. And because the companies, besides what that they have to pay you, they also have to pay the staff that is, all the other departments that are responsible for keeping up the company. So education and training, everybody agrees it's an important part. Recruiting. Um, for example, in education and training, we had a team of 10 or 15 worker or employees that did all of this content creation and training for you. The recruiting team, I don't know how many people they had, but I know it was a big department. The QA department was the biggest one because you had to have people that are making sure that quality of the interpretation is good, because this is what they're responsible for to the clients. And the QA was a huge department because you had to have several representatives of different languages to make it happen. So when you take all of this into account and you have to pay a little bit to every department, when you look at how much company makes, it's not much, guys. And I'm not saying that I feel sorry for anybody, but it was good. It was an eye opening to see what is happening on the other side, and to kind of open up a discussion of what we can do to kind of bring that gap up and fill it up so it's fair for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I worked at one of my first LSPs that I worked for, I remember sitting there thinking, it's funny now when I think back. I used to think, okay, I worked as a Brazilian Portuguese interpreter and I did the night shift. So I was making around 55 cents per minute at the time. And I remember thinking, well, if I'm making this much, these companies are all greedy. They probably make 4 to 5 times
Mhm.
more. So they're probably making like $4 to $5 or even more. Maybe they're making $10, 10 times more. And I was like, you know what? They probably make like $5 a minute and they're just giving me 50 cents. And I remember just being really like upset. And then come to find out,
Mhm.
the reality was completely different to what I thought it was. And again, this isn't an excuse because as we're going to show, this chart's going to come back because the LSPs are making some changes to this chart. But historically, this is where LSPs were spending money, right? And these changes that we're talking about, many, many, many LSPs are making these changes right now. We have spoken to people from different companies, and all of the companies are implementing these changes. And we're going to explain why that's happening in a little bit. But just to give you an idea, and Ina touched on a few of them, but one of the big ones that I had never stopped to consider was the platform. Now, we mentioned that LSPs have the interpreter platforms, those proprietary platforms where we log in and we service the calls, and vendors don't have platforms. What I didn't realize was that for you to have that platform, you in-house, you also have to have um, computer coders, developers, software engineers, IT teams. And I mean, those people are expensive. Those are not cheap
They're
professionals.
very expensive. That they
Mhm.
probably get paid the most.
Yeah.
They
Oh
get paid
yeah.
the most. You have, and there's so much that goes into that. Like you mentioned, you have to have coders, developers, you have to have IT, you have to have cybersecurity,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. That's a very critical, I want to say, aspect of LSP expenses.
Yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
think back on any time the platform would go down.
Oh,
Right.
It's like, oh my gosh.
no, it takes a lot. And then, you have the servers that you have to pay, the clouds and all of that. So
Mm,
there's really a lot that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
yeah,
lot that
infrastructure.
happens in the background that interpreters don't necessarily know. And even the people that work in admin for these LSPs, they don't really know everything that goes into building an LSP from the ground up and to keep it running.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
we can understand why interpreters are paid what they are, but it doesn't mean that it's just, it doesn't mean that it's fair and it's standard.
Mm-hmm.
There is definitely room for improvement there.
Oh, for sure. For sure. There really, really is. And there needs to be improvement.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're gonna get there. But the reality is that it never occurred to me it never occurred to me that an LSP in a lot of ways is also a tech company, because it really is all about the technology. It really is all
Yes.
about that platform, right? Because
Right.
without
Being
that
able to
platform,
provide the service.
Mm-hmm.
exactly,
To
exactly.
deliver the services, you have to have, the platform running efficiently at all times. Because remember,
Mhm.
these LSPs that are servicing healthcare systems, for example, they can't shut down. They never shut down. It's a 24/7 kind of thing. So to keep
Mm-hmm.
these engines running 24/7, 365 days, it takes a lot. It takes a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
Does. It does. And so just really quickly, because the times is getting away from us, but equipment, you have to go to these hospitals, you have to implement, and you can talk a lot about that. Those rolling carts, the tablets or
Mhm.
iPads, like
The
there's
phones,
so many
everything.
equipment that. Hmm? Yeah. And so there's a lot there that I think most interpreters don't know. So just to hit on them really quickly, you have the interpreters, you have the team to run the platform, you have the equipment, implementations and project management. They're sent all over the country to do this. So, you're having expenses having people go all over to implement with these hospitals. Sales and client services, because you need to get more contracts, you need to make sure your clients are happy. And then recruiting. You need to recruit interpreters. Operations, you need to make sure that people are showing up for their work shifts, that they're getting their scheduled breaks. People want to take vacations, they want to take time off, they have questions. All of a sudden, they're having issues with their computer. They need to reach out to you. So you need to have teams of supervisors and managers and people that interpreters can connect with. And so you have that whole operations department. Quality assurance, like Ina spoke about. If you service 150 languages and you're providing quality assurance for every language, you need to have enough quality assurance people to listen to all of those calls. Um, Education and training. And then, of course, the finance department, that's
Mm-hmm.
everybody's favorite because they pay everybody, right? They pay
Mm-hmm.
all of us. And then there's also interpreter compliance. And that's not even all of the departments. I mean, you have ASL, translation, special projects,
It's a lot.
HR, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
It's a
lot.
lot. Yeah. It's a
It's
monster.
a
It,
lot.
it really is. It
Mhm.
really
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah, and that brings us to the next part, right? So we've seen these expenses, we've seen kind of that groundwork, that foundation. So now let's take a quick look at the three things that are really impacting the industry. And I'm going to go really fast because I thought we had a little bit more time. We don't want to keep you guys here forever.
We have
Um,
to keep some content for next week. Paula, don't give them everything.
That's true. Maybe we'll just do these three and then we'll come back next week. So just to touch on these three, because we advertised these, I don't want to let them go without getting them. Um, we're seeing three things that are really hitting the industry hard right now. The first one is the economy, right? It's hitting all of us. I think post COVID and with the war in Ukraine and everything that's happening around the world, I don't think there's any country out there right now that their economy is flourishing. And it's certainly not the case here in the US. And in an effort to lower or to kind of curb rising inflation, the US went ahead and they raised interest rates. And that's great. It keeps inflation in check, but it's also really bad because it makes it harder for companies to be able to borrow. And I think something that most people don't know is that it's really, really common for any company in any industry, but especially in the LSP industry, to rely heavily on credit, loans, and investors. And because of how the economy is right now, banks aren't being that receptive to giving companies loans and credit. And a lot of times, LSPs don't have kind of that cash flow that they need to pay everybody and to do everything. And so they do rely a lot more than you would imagine on credit and loans. And that right now is under a lot of stress. And then as if that weren't enough, enter AI. I have spoken to a few people over the last few weeks who, and being in compliance over the last 2 years, one of the things I did was go to a compliance conference last year, and they talked extensively about this. And AI, it's here. It's here, and there's not much we can do about that. And a lot of the LSPs are really scared that AI is going to basically take the place of human interpreters. And because they're scared that AI is going to take the place of human interpreters, what they're doing is they're taking funds away from interpreter development and they're putting a lot of those funds towards AI development because they're trying to win the AI race because they know that the company that gets this up and running first will will fare better in theory. Now, this is all in theory. And the reason I say that is because AI is prone, it's error prone. Like, I mean, and this is a really silly little example that I like to use. But the other day I was doing some gardening and I was trying to do companion gardening. And I asked AI, one of those chats, which plants I should plant together. And it told me that I needed to plant my carrots with I don't remember what the other plant was with some other plant because carrots grow on vines. And I was like, carrots grow on vines? No, carrots are roots. And then I wrote back, what do you mean carrots grow on vines? They're root vegetables. They grow under the ground. And AI said, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. But had I not caught the mistake, AI wouldn't have caught it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about that in light of medical interpretation, imagine patient says something, AI makes a mistake. And unlike a human interpreter who, I've made mistakes before and I've corrected them. I've said, oh, this is the interpreter speaking. Um, please give me a moment. I need to clarify. Or please give me a moment. I made a mistake. I need to go back. AI is not going to do that. On top of that, you have cultural nuances, a lot of interpreting, especially with VRI, which is why VRI is so much better than OPI. With VRI, it's not just the words you're hearing, it's the body language, it's the tone of voice, it's the culture that you need to know deeply to understand the words as well, because culture informs language and language informs culture. And so that's something that AI is just, it's not there. I don't think it'll ever be there. But instead of these companies trying to take steps to guarantee that, yes, we can use AI, we can use AI as a tool, but it needs to always be used in the hand of a human, they're just going full speed ahead. And just a little aside, this is something we're going to have a video about in the future. One of the goals that we have at Verbatim is to partner with other professional associations, governing bodies, hospitals, and even any LSPs that might be interested, and legislators. We are going to work really hard to try and get legislation passed to ensure that AI can only be used as a tool and not as an actual interpreter within medical interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
because you need to always have a human there. It'll be great if you can have an AI tool where, if somebody says a medical term, it gives you two or three options for translation, right, on your screen that you only see it and you can say, oh yeah, this is the right option. This is the word. I forgot it for a second, but it popped up. That's great. But to just let AI handle that, even on the level of empathy, of just showing human regard and care, that's something you're not going to get from a machine. And I think that these companies are really missing the ball by just forging ahead without any thought to the consequences. And instead of looking into what they can do legally to ensure that they safeguard these medical interactions. And I don't know if anybody has a comment on that one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Paula. I mean, in my language, and I see somebody here that I think speaks my language, but I speak Russian. My language is English Russian, and I I just do not see AI totally replacing what interpreters do, because we have expressions, we have words that have double meanings, and there's no way that AI would recognize it. And so I mean, I totally agree with Paula. Instead of, investing in AI, you have to kind of see where it's going to take you and what else you
Mhm.
can do with it um, instead of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are two areas that are really pulling on the purses of these LSPs, but they're they're nothing compared to this next one. And this is the big one, right? And that is this brand new labor law that passed last year and is responsible for all of the sweeping changes that you're seeing in terms of interpreters being let go, interpreters being put in with BPOs, and all of that craziness. And that is the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the Fair Labor Standards Act, it was passed in March of 2024. And what it did basically was it redefined what, or not even redefined, it made it very clear to the companies that it is going to be looking at clear distinctions between independent contractors and employees. So, what does that mean? Under the Fair Labor Act, if you are being treated as an independent contractor, meaning you're being paid as an independent contractor, which means they're not paying you your taxes. They're not paying into Social Security. They're not giving you PTO because you're an independent contractor. You're not an employee. But if you are being treated as an employee, then the company becomes liable for all of your back taxes for the whole time that you worked for the company, and the company can be fined. And this has sent the industry into a panic because the criteria that the government has laid out to determine if someone is being treated as as an employee is it's really tricky for LSPs. So here's the criteria. Criteria number one: um, you can't just be working for that one company. You have to have multiple companies that you work for if you are an independent contractor or a freelance. So if you only work for one company, you're an employee in the eyes of the government. Number two, you can't have a fixed schedule. You have to make your own schedule, and you can't be working overtime. Number three, the company can't provide oversight or professional development. In other words, if you're being QA'd or if you're getting education and training, you're an employee. You're not an independent contractor. Now, this has been just, I mean, this is shocking, right? And I think that as often happens, the government was trying to help, and as usual, they just made things worse, right? Because now these companies are going, oh, so you're going to count my whole workforce, which for a lot of LSPs, pretty much their entire workforce was made up of independent contractors, because I QA, because I offer education and training, because they only work for my company, because they have a fixed schedule. Now they're considered an employee, and I'm going to have to go back and pay Social Security, taxes, and all of these things for all of these thousands of people. It'll bankrupt any company. Any company will be bankrupt by that. And so that is why you are seeing this mad dash to convert all interpreters to either BPOs or employees. I'm just going to take a pause here in case we have any questions or comments.
There's a
You're
question
muted.
here from Ksenia, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Um, it's saying we've had AB5 here in California for a couple of years. It seems similar to the labor law you're talking about. I'm not familiar with AB5. I haven't heard of that. Paula, do you know, Ina?
Yeah, when I was in compliance, that was one of the things that we had seen, was that it was becoming more and more and more difficult to do business in
In
California.
California,
It
yeah,
became very difficult to bring
right.
interpreters in. I do believe, from my understanding, that the law in California actually goes beyond the
Yeah.
Fair Labor Act. It's actually stricter. And the reality is that there are workarounds, and that's what's so frustrating to me is that the LSPs and here's the thing. I don't want to freak out all of the interpreters out there, but the reality is that most LSPs going forward, they are going to completely stop using US based interpreters. They just can't. They will bring some on as employees,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not bringing on if a company
Independent
had a
contractor.
thousand yeah, if a company had 1,000 US based interpreters, they are not going to hire 1,000 US based interpreters. They're going to hire maybe 100 US based interpreters. And here's why. A an employee costs you 30 to 40% more than a
Mm-hmm.
contractor, right? So let's say you have an employee and a contractor. You pay both of them $14 an hour as a base pay. The contractor, you pay 14. The employee, you pay him 14 as a salary, but then you also pay him another 3, 4, $5 on top of that for taxes, payroll taxes,
Right.
social security,
Exactly.
TO, and on
Insurance,
it goes. Huh?
medical insurance, and everything.
Yes,
401k,
yes,
they want everything.
Mhm.
yes, yes. So employees will always cost the company more. And so because employees cost the company more, many LSPs, and I was shocked. I was shocked. I spoke to an insider recently, and they told me that many LSPs have already signaled that they will no longer work with US based interpreters.
That's
And
correct. I've heard the same.
only a very small percentage will have US based interpreters, but it will be a very, very, very small part of their workforce. And that's just
A
terrifying,
nightmare.
right?
It's terrifying because it's terrifying in all aspects, even for the clients in these healthcare systems. They're gonna see a significant drop in the accessibility of certain languages.
Mhm.
It's just really a nightmare. It's gonna hit the fan, and it's gonna hit the fan
Oh
hard,
yeah.
very
Oh
hard.
yeah. And I don't think that
Mhm.
the hospitals see it coming.
They don't yet, but they will. They will start seeing it in the
Mhm.
services that they get. They're already,
Yes.
most of them are already contracted with some LSP, right? They don't necessarily keep up to date with all of the changes and all the laws and regulations that are happening because they're focusing on patient care. They're
Yeah.
focusing on what they need to do to keep patients alive, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so, but
And they
they will
trust
start
and
noticing it. They will surely
and they
start noticing it
yeah, yeah, but and
sooner rather
here's
than
the
later.
thing. They also trust the LSPs that they've contracted with, and they
Exactly.
expect things to work the way they've
Mhm.
always worked,
Exactly.
and they have
That's
no
correct.
idea that the LSPs are doing this.
No.
Mhm.
So, yeah, no, it's really, really bad. And so
But they're gonna
there
find out.
there
I know for sure that they're gonna find out.
Yeah, yeah. And there are things, and we're going to discuss these things next week. There are things that US based interpreters can do so that they can still work as independent contractors and not be um, under the Fair Labor Act. And that's something that we're going to talk about next week because we're kind of working on how we can actually help facilitate that for you guys. So we'll see if we can bring you a little bit more information next week and not just give you information, but also give you like some actionable steps that you can take and be able to support you guys with that. But the reality is that, and I see a question here. Wait, is that the reason
Yes.
why all these changes are happening? Is it not like a one company type of thing? I was under the impression that it was something different that came in from GL Trading. And yes, to answer your question, yes, this is why these changes are happening. This is something that no one is talking about because very few people know. Because this is just, usually if you're in compliance or if you're working at, in certain departments in LSP, you would know about this, and they're not advertising it because they don't want the interpreters to know, I guess, because they want to be able to make their changes before interpreters get wind of this, is what I'm assuming. Because nobody's really talking about it. And maybe they don't want the hospitals to know at this point. I don't know. Um, but LSPs are basically being forced to take action because of this new law. Now, what they aren't being forced to do. So here's where it gets tricky, right? And we're going to change this chart in a second here. Yes, this law makes it difficult to work with U.S. interpreters. It does not make it impossible. If they wanted to, they could still work with U.S.-based interpreters. But this law only applies to US-based interpreters. It does not apply to international interpreters. And yet, the LSPs are using this issue as an excuse to now also outsource all of the international interpreters to BPOs and vendors. And let's take a quick look here. I want to change this.
A couple more questions, Paula. Well, there's
Yes.
one more question. There's a comment. Ksenia said, the only hope is in person. Not necessarily. Our goal here is to address these issues before everything hits the fan, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole point of this initiative. And Paula has worked a lot in compliance. Ina has worked in education and training and quality assurance. I've worked more on the client side of things. And so I want to bring in that perspective and also, provide any insight that I can to see how we can address these issues before they become the nightmare that we anticipate.
Yeah.
Paula, do we still have time for questions? Yes?
We do. And
there's another
let me
comment.
just go ahead.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm just
No.
reading here.
And
I
let me just show you guys this new chart really quickly. This is what we're seeing happening right now, right? Right now, what we're seeing happening with the LSPs is that by sending all of their interpreters to BPOs and vendors, let's take an LSP that has decided it's not going to keep any US based interpreters and everybody else, it's sending them over to BPOs and vendors. That LSP no longer has to spend money on recruiting for interpreters and operations. It doesn't have to have a workforce operations. It doesn't have to have supervisors, recruiters. It doesn't need to have any of that. It no longer has a quality assurance department because it doesn't have any interpreters to do quality assurance on, right? It's everything to BPOs and vendors. It no longer needs to invest in education and training. It no longer needs to invest in interpreter payroll. So that's a huge chunk off the table. It no longer needs to invest in interpreter compliance. So all of a sudden, you've taken 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things off of their plates, but they're not making the pay rates any higher, right? Now, and here's where that balance comes in, right? We've tried to be really balanced here and show you guys that yes, for many, many years, LSPs have worked with very tight margins. They've done the best they can with these tight margins. But what we're seeing right now in this shift is we're seeing these companies take out all of these interpreters and hand them over to these BPOs and take off all of these expenses. And now they have a much larger profit than they've ever had before. And that's really concerning. And here's why it's really concerning. And we'll wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so. Here's why it's very concerning. We're going to go to chart number 3. And this is going to be our last chart. This is a vendor chart. Let me add it. This is a vendor chart. Now, again, these numbers aren't real. This is just to give you an idea, right? Let's say that as an interpreter, let's say that you're based in China. And let's say that for your language pair, you were being paid $14 an hour. And the company you work for has now told you you're going to need to work for a vendor. And again, this isn't happening at one company. This is happening in multiple companies. I have heard so far of 5 companies that are doing this. Okay, so this is not specific to any one company. They just told you you're going to work for a BPO. that BPO is now going to be paid the $14 that you used to be paid. So when the LSP contracted you directly, it paid you $14 an hour. Now that it's contracted with the BPO or the vendor, it will pay that vendor the same $14 an hour it was paying you. So in terms of interpreter pay, there's been no difference for the LSP, right? They're still spending the exact same amount of money on interpreter pay that they used to spend on interpreter pay. But where it changes is they don't need to spend money on any of the other departments to support their interpreters because they sent them over to the vendor. Now, the vendor is going to take the $14 an hour, but they're not going to give you the $14 an hour because they also have overhead, right? So they have some slight equipment. They might give you backdrops, but even equipment is tenuous at best. Many don't even give you a backdrop. But they might spend a little bit on equipment. They'll spend on sales because they need to get more LSPs, contracts with more LSPs, client services because they need to keep the LSPs happy, and recruits because they need to bring interpreters in, and they'll spend on operations because they need to make sure that you're showing up to your schedules, that you're taking your breaks, and so on and so forth. So that's where they'll spend money. But where they won't spend money on is where they've never spent money on, which is education and training, quality assurance, interpreter compliance, strict interpreter onboarding processes. Those things are off the table. They're not going to spend a penny on those things. And the worst part is that because vendors work with much smaller margins in terms of like they don't have as many contracts, right, as a big LSP. An LSP might be contracted to thousands of hospitals and clinics and healthcare institutions. So it can get just a little bit of profit off of each one of them and still make a profit. That vendor, they might only have one or two LSPs that they work for. They might not get that much work from those LSPs. So they tend to take a much bigger piece of the pie. They tend to take much larger profit. And this explains why we're hearing from so many interpreters saying, hey, I used to make $14 an hour. I'm now being offered 4. I'm now being offered 6. And from everything we've seen, it seems like it's a reduction of about 40 to 60% when you go from working directly for an LSP to working for a vendor. And so these are the market forces that are making it so that as interpreters, you are being transitioned to these BPOs and vendors. And you are seeing these much, much, much lower offerings. So I think there were a few questions. Did you want to send those my way, Excel?
I think I answered most of
Yeah.
them.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think
So,
there were some comments about, AI taking over.
mhm,
You kind of
mhm,
touched on that already, Paula. The way
mhm,
I answered in the comment section that, as far as I know, there are already discussions happening within the healthcare space about leveraging AI resources to take over. But like you
mhm,
mentioned, the quality might suffer. There might be possibilities of leveraging AI to interpret certain scenarios, maybe during intake and stuff like that.
mhm.
But very oftentimes, there will be a need for human intervention.
Oh,
These
for
are
sure.
patients' lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did want to comment or answer to that question that there are definitely talks about AI being brought into that space. So that's a little bit concerning. There was also a comment regarding, you know, how all of these changes are going to affect the quality of the interpreter services
It's gonna be
provided.
awful.
It's going to be terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we touched on that.
And,
And
and
that's
and really
about
quickly, it's going to be so. And here's the crazy part about it, right? The more LSPs stop investing in education and training, quality assurance, the more interpreters are left without those courses, without the professional development. You're going to see the really, really, really good interpreters leave the industry. You're going to see bilinguals take their place. And as Excel said before, bilinguals are not the same thing as interpreters. And because the BPOs aren't going to be offering them quality assurance, feedback, education and training, they're not going to get it much better, right? They're just going to do what they know to do. That's what they know to do. And it's going to start causing there to be much more errors, much more mistakes, and maybe even lawsuits. And
Mm-hmm.
in a really crazy way, it will make AI look even more reasonable.
Yeah.
It's going to have this effect where it's, the hospital is going to say, oh, humans make so much mistakes. We need to bring in a
We
machine.
need
We
to,
need
Mhm.
to bring in
yeah.
AI. And so it's kind of going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy where we don't need to go fully to AI, but because the companies are neglecting to take care of the interpreters, take care of their development, take care of their skills, it's going to just bring that on even faster if we don't do anything to stop it. And I think we need to get ready to stop this stream right now because we've been on for a really long time, much longer than I anticipated.
We're
But
women. We talk too much.
I know. We're women and interpreters. All we do is talk.
We talk too much.
Paula, I
Um,
wanted to address one comment that somebody
mhm.
made here that it says it's hard for US-based interpreters, but I do believe that international interpreters are really being screwed because the BPOs are just spraying on them with disrespectfully low rates. And
Yeah.
and we do agree with all of this, and this is partially why we started this company. So
Mhm.
you guys know and understand this, and we are going to cover, in many more events like this, what we can do as the industry to change all of this. Uh,
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And that's, I think, we've covered a lot today. This should have been 3 different lives, but we see everything happening. We see, everybody worried and freaking out right now, and there's so much information that you guys need, and it was just really important to us to say, you know what, we're gonna sit down and we're gonna give you guys the information so that next week we can get together with you guys again, same day, same time. We will come in with you guys again next week and we'll start talking to you guys about the solutions. And we've thought really long and hard. We're working together between us as well as with a few other contacts that we've been talking to and will continue to explore to be able to bring a multifaceted solution. This isn't something that anybody's going to be able to say, oh, we're just going to do one thing and it's going to fix it. I mean, we're going to attack this from 4 or 5 different directions with your help, because we really do believe that there is still time to turn this around. There is still time to not only stem the tide, not only keep these things from happening, but to actually use this as an opportunity and a jumping off place to make really important changes to bring up that pay that interpreters are being offered and the dignity that interpreters deserve, as well as the education and training and the quality standards that are so important to the industry. And, we're not doing this to waste our time. We're not doing this to waste your time. We really do believe, and we are really hopeful for what can be done. But I will leave you with this. These companies are doing this because as an interpreter, you are alone. It doesn't matter if there's 50,000 interpreters. At the end of the day, there's just one interpreter. It's you, and you're alone. And you can take their rate or you can leave it. If you don't want to work, they'll find somebody else, unless you speak a super rare language. Um, and that's something that we're going to change, that we really need to work together, but that will only change if everyone on our end and on your end, as an interpreter, becomes really conscious of the fact that unless we come together, and again, next week we'll give you much more information on how we can do that, but unless we come together, unless we work together, and unless we become a collective as interpreters, you will never have a seat at the table. And they will continue to do whatever they have to do to take care of their side of the industry, because at the end of the day, you're just one person and there's not much you can do, but we're here to change that. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. I want to thank you, Ina and Excel, so much for taking time out of your schedules. And well, I mean, we're in this together. We're doing this together, but you're still here.
Absolutely.
You're still here for this
Absolutely.
live. It's scary. It's a little bit, seat of our pants here. It's not easy to just hop on a video and talk.
That's
But thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you all who joined us tonight, and
Yes.
we'll talk soon.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
everyone.
much. Thank you, Paula, Excel, and thank you very much, everyone, to
It's
join for
awesome.
joining us. We'll see you next week.
Yes. Have a good
Thank
night,
you, all of
everyone.
you.
Bye bye.
Good night. Bye.